Australian magpie. It's one of Australia's most loved birds. It's about the size of a crow. It's even smarter than a crow. It has a wonderful song, and every spring, September or October, you will hear on the local news, look out, the magpies are nesting. And what that means, that happens because magpies have a very large conceptual sense of home. They defend a very large perimeter around their nests. 20, 30 meters or so out from their nest on every side is their boundary, their sense of home. Well, in an urban area, that will frequently include a street. And a vehicle that's going down this street really fast, like a car, is not going to, the magpie barely notice. A street, if you're going down the street rather slowly, the way a pedestrian does, you're actually moving too slowly for the magpie to find you threatening. But in between those two, cyclists are just right. They're going at exactly the speed that the hawk, that the magpie is really fearing is going. And so if you cycle past a magpie nest in the spring, the magpie will attack you. From high above, it will drop down on you very quickly, and it will aim right for that little vent in your helmet. Yeah. And these things cause, obviously, crashes and some bloody injuries. I don't think anyone has actually died from a magpie-induced crash, but it's a pretty scary thing. And if you're ever in Australia in the spring, you may notice that all the cyclists have little pieces of pipe cleaner in bright colors sticking out of the tops of their helmets. That is apparently the best way to dissuade a magpie. Why do I give you this little bit of field guide trivia? Because that's NIMBYism. That's what NIMBYism is. That's what we are all defensive about home to some degree. And we all have trouble finding the appropriate radius out from our bodies to associate with home. And so, of course, we have a certain sense of defensiveness about our homes or apartments, a slightly larger sense of defensiveness about the community that they're in, and so on. And once I encountered these birds, I suddenly understood all of these angry women who have been standing up in meetings and yelling at me for things. Because that's what it is. And the point is not just to ridicule it, except, okay, this feeling of home is so fundamental that we share it not just with other mammals, but with reptiles and birds and even a fair number of insects. So it's something we're always going to be dealing with. Now what happens when these two forces come out of balance? Well, when practicality overwhelms and starts moving into the space of culture, you have habit. Too much how and not enough why. It might be a good definition of habit. Highway engineering, for example. Highway engineering from the manual that says that all highways have to be exactly these dimensions and have these curvatures and so on. Another example of a very practicality-driven environment, though, might be conventional bus operations. And if you sometimes wonder why a bus operating agency like King County Metro is not always a center for creativity, and we just have to accept that a bus operation is about doing it the same way every day. And you're being rewarded for doing it the same way every day. And you're being promoted for doing it the same way every day. We're not selecting for creativity in that system. We're all selecting for the others. And I say that with the highest respect to the bus drivers in the room and to everyone else I've worked with in bus operations. That yes, you can't expect an operations-driven culture like a King County Metro to be a centerpiece of innovation. It's just, it's not what you're consulting for. So there is a necessary sort of give and take and a necessary sort of balance that has to happen in the conversation about transit. And bus operations is one very important perspective. But generally speaking, I know I'm in the presence of a excessive or runaway practicality when I hear a line like we follow the manual, to which I always have to ask, but is the manual derived from our current values, or is it coding some older set of values that aren't actually what we believe in anymore, which is the case, I think, with a lot of the highway capacity manual. And the other line I hear a lot, and I hear this a lot from bus operations, is we've always done it this way because it works. And that's fine, but what do you mean by works? And if works just means that nobody has complained, well, that is one definition of works, but it's not the definition of works that gets you anywhere with your city. And by the way, we're complaining now, so that's no longer true. We're always dealing with we're always conversing with those kinds of points of view, and I try to be respectful of them. At the same time, ultimately pushing back a little on what exactly the underlying values of what you're doing are. Because ultimately, when you've pushed practicality into the space of culture, what you've pushed out of it is our right to make value judgments, right? Instead, you're operating in that space entirely by the book, and coded into that book may be things you no longer believe. Now the opposite problem, vision without practicality, leads to boondoggle. Projects driven by excitement that overrule practical concerns with disappointing results. Seattle Honor Project. Nobody laughed in San Francisco when I put up this slide. One of the most basic textbook kinds of boondoggle is a project that is driven by an excessive emotional attachment to a single technology. And when you get really, really emotionally attached to a technology, there is a danger that somewhere down the line, when you start coming under a lot of pressure, costs or impacts or whatever else, you're going to be tempted to do whatever it takes to save the technology. And as we all know, in the 11th hour of the Seattle Honor Project, one of the last things they did was to cut back the ends of the proposed line to try to save a piece of the technology. And my view of that, with all due respect to, I'm sure, people in the room who were part of that project and who were involved in it with the best of intentions from the beginning, was that you reached a point where you were sacrificing the ultimate product, which is mobility, which is ability to get people places. You were sacrificing that to save the technology. And when you see that coming, watch out, step back. Because my own view is that if instead of a Seattle Popular Monorail Authority, you had the same funding stream associated with a Northwest and West Seattle Rapid Transit Authority, then when you came under a crunch, there would have been an opportunity to step back and think, well, maybe Monorail's not going to work here, maybe we should look at light rail. And you might very well have something. So, I talk a lot about the Seattle Monorail Project, and I want to talk, by the way, I'm interested in talking more with people who are around some of that history from various perspectives, because the book I'm working is probably going to include some kind of mention of it, because it just appears to be a very good, clear parable of this particular problem. Personal rapid transit is another, and I'm sure you can think of others as well. Here's an interesting example of a vision-driven voice. It's interesting. One of the interesting things about intensive emotional attachment to transit technologies, they tend to either be about the future or about the past. They tend to either be futuristic in the way that the monorail is, whoosh, zoom, Jetsons, or they tend to be about a quieter, slower, more peaceful time that we would like to get back to. My friend Darren Mardahl wrote a book called My Kind of Transit. Darren is a very smart man. He's an urban designer. He wouldn't claim to be a transit expert, but he wrote a book called My Kind of Transit, which made him a very big target. And so here's an example of the kind of thing he said. A passenger vehicle that travels a mere 10 miles an hour, such as the New Orleans streetcar, may be anathema to the current transportation ideology, which I think is time that is lost to the destination, however, is time afforded to the passenger to people watch, window shop, and sightseeing. A slow-moving transit vehicle adds welcome animation to the street, drawing people to it, unlike a fast one from which safety-minded pedestrians keep their distance. Now, that last sentence is certainly true, but the overall tone, this is an example of the overall thesis of Darren's book, which is basically that we should look more to places like Disneyland for inspiration in our urban transit systems, and that we should be looking particularly at drawing into our urban transit systems more of the features that you would associate with tourist-oriented services and or even amusement park rides. And when I saw that, I mean, my response to Darren was, okay, you have a meeting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Are you going to set the alarm at 6 and take the boring old subway, or are you going to set it at 5 so you can take a 10-mile-an-hour service that will allow you to people watch, window shop, and sightsee? I know what Darren's getting at here. He's getting at something